Today I will be taking a class on British prose, or to be exact, English essay, the origin and development of English essay. So, when we talk about English essay, we should start with the definition part, isn't it? Or like the origin part. Going back to the definition, we don't have a satisfactory or comprehensive definition for an essay. Basically because essays evolved through the ages. Of course we have definitions given by different people. We have definitions by Dr. Johnson, a loose sally of mind, irregular, indigested piece, not a regular and orderly performance, or something like an after dinner monologue by an interesting mind. So we have essays, we have definitions, lot of definitions for essays, or even something like a work of prose art. That's also a definition for an essay. But the problem is something like all these essays, all these definitions, they cannot explain the evolution that happened in the field of prose writing or essay writing, because in course of time essays changed. For example, we have a comprehensive definition like essay is something like a work of prose art. But the problem is something like we had essays in later times which are not in prose form. For example, the essay by Alexander Pope, essay on criticism, essay on man. These are essays written in poetic form. Actually, they were written in heroic couplets. So basically, when we talk about the definition of an essay, we cannot give a satisfactory or comprehensive definition of what we call an essay, because we have different formats. We have a lot of different kinds of format. We can have a historical document as an essay. We can have a treatise, a research treatise, a scientific treatise as an essay. The things that we used to write in magazines, journals, whatever be it, even reviews, all of them are considered as essay at one point or other in history. So trying to find out a comprehensive definition or a satisfactory definition of essay seems to be a bit problematic. Now, going back to the origin. So whenever we talk about English essay, we have a name like Francis Bacon, the father of English essay. That's Francis Bacon. But is it really the starting point of English essay or essay as such? When we talk about prose form, initially is that British prose. Prose is not just essays. Prose is actually the format in which it is written. So when we talk about prose is actually the form of language that exhibits a grammatical structure, which is obviously it has a natural flow of speech rather than a rhythmic structure like a poetry. So basically the prose piece that is written, the format in which it is written makes it essentially prose. And essay is one literary genre in prose. So coming back to Francis Bacon, the father of English essay, he himself said at one point of time regarding his essay something like, the term is new, but the thing is ancient. He was talking about essays. The term essay is new. That means nowadays people start calling it essays, but the thing he's talking about is the essay format. It's ancient. Because he knew that we had essays, they had essays before Francis Bacon. We have essays, if you're looking at ancient Greek text, say basically the epistles that we have. The epistles, that's written in letter format. The epistles of Seneca and Cicero, they were basically essays. If you're looking at the structure of those epistles, we can conveniently consider them as essays. For example, a classic example is Seneca's Epistle to Lucilius. Those were actually reflective pieces. They were not like they were writing a letter to somebody. They were basically talking about, reflecting about these different aspects of life. Same is the case with Plutarch's Moralia. In that particular piece, Plutarch is famous for his works on ancient Greek and Roman rulers, from which Shakespeare was really influenced and taken a lot of characters. But coming back to Moralia, this particular essay is basically a collection of essays on moral subjects. But at that point of time, nobody called it essays. I mean, they were basically epistles on Moralia. So that's why Bacon says something like, essays, the term is new, but the thing is ancient, not even old. He used the term ancient because it was there before generations. So we have something like this written generations before. Okay, but the real question of essay, the origin of essay in our terms, in our literacy, we started studying from Bacon, isn't it? When we talk about English essay. But even before that, the forerunner of essay at that point of time was the French writer Michel Montaigne. Montaigne is actually the father of personal essays. He wrote essays, basically they were self-reflectory. He wrote about what he thought about different aspects. Actually, when we talk about essays, there is another definition where it says essays, W.H. Hudson's essay, a true essay is essentially personal. That means it belongs to the literature of self-expression. So we have essays of self-expression, literature of self-expression, where they talk about personal aspects. That means here we have an issue here we have a differentiation between Montaigne's type of essays and Bacon's type of essays. Bacon's essays were not personal essays. He always had this objective outlook towards things. His essays were definitely objective, and he was not so personal, but he was judgmental regarding the issues that he discussed. For instance, to explain it better, say if you read an essay by Bacon like Of Friendship, we will understand. We might not understand what kind of a friend Bacon is, but he will be talking about what friendship is all about. What are the different aspects of friendship, and we might not know whether he is a good friend, which is different in the case of Montaigne. Because if Montaigne was writing an essay on Of Friendship, he will be talking about his what kind of a friend he is, what he think about a friend. So we will understand. We might understand, because he haven't written something like that. We might understand that what kind of a friend Montaigne is. That's basically the difference between the personal essay and the objective or didactic essays that Bacon wrote. So we have the difference here. So even though he is considered as the father of English essay, Montaigne should be indebted for introducing it to the Europe. So we have personal essays and objective essays at that point of time. Maybe, or more accurately, at the middle part of the 17th century, we have essays, English essays introduced to the English literature, English essays introduced. And one of the most important point in English essays or Bacon's essays is something like, we have commonplace books. From where these essays originated? That's the question. Because before Bacon, people used to jot down the things that they thought regarding these issues, what they later published as essays. But we never had a comprehensive publication material. People used to talk about different issues, but they never published it as essays. So it started with Bacon, and all his essays, all of Bacon's essays, came from his Commonplace book. Commonplace book is actually a book that the nobles of the Elizabethan period they used to carry around. They used to jot down information, maybe anecdotes, stories, maybe thoughts that come out from the discussions that they have with their friends. So when they usually meet, maybe a gathering, they'll be talking about different ideas. So they will be sharing their experiences. They will be talking about different aspects of a thought, an area, and these people will be writing down. I need to remember this for later reference. So I'll be writing this down in maybe a commonplace book. So this is from where Bacon developed his essays. So basically, Bacon's commonplace book developed into his essays. And there are other writers also. Even Ben Jonson, he published his commonplace book, which was actually titled Discoveries or Timbers. We have two titles for that. Ben Jonson published his commonplace book. So basically, at that point of time, they never thought something like essays as a literary genre is introduced, but they were basically commonplace book materials. So that brings to the next question, where the authenticity of these essays. I mean, can we really say the things that we find, the thoughts or the notes that we find in Bacon's commonplace book, can that be attributed to himself alone? No, definitely not. Even Bacon himself said about this. Because Bacon's essays were not definitely his personal thoughts. Because always there is a possibility that the things that he has written down in his commonplace book can be others' thoughts. Because he admitted that. That's why. So basically, we can say something like the essays by Bacon on different subjects are his judgmental opinion on that areas. It need not be his personal opinion. Okay, so that's actually the starting point or the origin point of English essays. That was in the 17th century. So let's look what else we have in 17th century itself. Actually, after the period of Bacon, we have, like in the 17th century, essays written in the form of character sketches. Yeah, character sketches. Even because the imitators of the Greek philosopher Theophrastus and the Roman playwright Seneca, when they used to write detailed descriptions of various personalities, it was really well known in Europe. Like the personalities, like it's basically like pen pictures of various types of men and women. For example, the hypocrite, the pen pictures of that particular personality. So that's in the form of an essay. The milkmaid, the traveler, the pen picture of a traveler in the form of, it's basically character sketches. We have it in the Greek philosopher Theophrastus. He used to write this kind of character sketches of different kinds of personalities. And basically, the writers of this format was John Hall, Thomas Overbury, and John Earle. So we have writers like this at that point of time, and they were not basically personal. They followed a more Baconian model of writing, Bacon style. So they were not personal, more close to Sir Thomas Browne and Abraham Cowley. Even Abraham Cowley wrote an essay on Of Myself, and this Of Myself itself is not personal as such. Okay, so that's basically what we have with the first part of, or till the middle part of 17th century, and later 17th century, which is precisely the Restoration period. Restoration period was really important in the development of essay, basically because a new form of or a new type of essay was introduced by none other than John Dryden. He introduced critical essays to literature. So that was like a great step over. The form was actually mountains. When I say it's mountains, it's personal. It's written in a personal tone, but the theme was literary criticism. If you look at all the prefaces of Bacon, prefaces of Dryden, they are literary essays, essays on literary criticism. Even we can look at essays of dramatic poesy, whatever be it. So that particular period, the 40 years from 1660 to 1700, which is even called as the age of Dryden, marked the emergence and in the flourishing of critical essays in English literature. Preface to Fables. It was partially critical and partially a personal essay by Dr. Dryden. So after that, that was the end of 17th century. We are moving on to 18th century. This is actually the most important period in the history of essay, English essay, because periodical essays and social essays came to be, or even the 18th century, as you know, it was the rise of journalism. It was in the 18th century that journalism came to be, and essays began to appear in periodicals, deriving abundant materials from manners of the time. So we have a lot of examples. Daniel Defoe's Review, REVIEW, Review was a journal, and actually that particular journal set the fashion of having journals. And we have the most celebrated journals of that time by Richard Steele and Joseph Addison, and they are definitely the acknowledged masters of this particular format. We have Steele's Tatler in 1709 with the declared objective of exposing the false arts of life, of pulling off the disguises of cunning, vanity, and affectation, and of recommending a general simplicity in dress, discourse, and behavior. Actually, with this particular objective in mind, they wrote essays, and like they already said, the objective was to reform the society. They were just picking the issues, the fallacies, the problems in the society, and writing it in a satirical way, thereby trying to reform the society that they see in front of them. And Tatler ceased the publication in 2 years. It was replaced by the much celebrated Spectator, another journal that we have, and this time still associated with Addison, and they had 550 issues till it finally ceased in December 1712. So basically, this 550 issues of Spectator, it created a strong base of English essays and literature, because it became a prominent literary genre at this point of time. So if you're looking at the development of essay, this was the most poignant period, the most important period in which English essay reached another level, like different heights. So the basic slogan of Spectator was something like to take philosophy, to bring philosophy out of closets and libraries, schools and colleges, to dwell in clubs and assemblies, at tea tables and in coffee houses. So the idea was something like to take academic discussions or literary discussions or the intellectual discussions of any sort from institutions of academia to the common people. So it made essay more social. And for the first time in history of English literature, letters, literature, it had a more social purpose. That's what actually Terry Eagleton talked about in his essay, The Function of Criticism. He considered the function of criticism is basically social. It has a social commitment, and the 18th century essays by Addison and Steele, they served the purpose. So because basically their essays were more like affecting the social scenario of that particular period. So because they were discussing the issues that they were generally addressing in the society at that point of time. Even critics like Sainsbury, he said something like they taught the 18th century how it should, and especially how it should not behave in public places. Ranging from churches to theaters, what books it should like or how it should like them, how it should treat its lovers, wives, mistresses, husbands, parents, friends, so how they should behave in public places. So this was the kind of idea that it propagated. And for the first time in history, the essay was employed to serve a distinctively social purpose, which was really important. And periodical essays was equally adapted for literary criticism also. We have essays like delineation of characters like Roger D. Coverley. Coverley papers were a kind of essays written by along with Spectator Club. We have essays. We have somebody like Roger D. Coverley who's talking about different ideas in the society. He's talking about the issues in church, Sunday in the country. That was an essay in which he's talking about what's happening with the 18th century churches. So they were basically satirizing, but it had always had a humor element in that. So people started thinking because each and every aspect in the society was discussed by Addison and Steele in their essays. We have other essays also. Even we have somebody like Jonathan Swift, who again employed satire in his essays. Battle of Books is a classic example of how he employed satire to talk about the superiority of the ancient writers and the modern writers. Modern by I mean the contemporary writers of his period. And after this, along with this, we had essays written by Dr. Johnson, the greatest critic that English literature have ever produced. Dr. Johnson's essays, it were published in Rambler from 1750 to 53, and later his essays were published in The Idler from 1758 to 1760. Johnson's essays showed his command and mastery over the language, and it was humorously explained by other critics like people read Johnson's essays as duty, not for pleasure, because that's the kind of language that he employed. We had other writers at that point of time like Oliver Goldsmith. Other writers were there also prominent, but the most prominent writers were obviously the writers of the century were Addison, Steele, and Dr. Johnson, of course. So that was 18th century, and we have to move on to 19th century. In 19th century, the periodical newspaper or the journals that we are talking about now, that we talked about, gave place to critical journal and commonly called as review. This review is not the review that we nowadays call a review. It's not a review that we have these days. It's actually like journals. We have reviews in place of journals, and it had little concern with social and personal topic. Its main content being literary and other criticism. And best known reviews in the 19th century were Edinburgh and Quarterly, and they were representative reviews of the political parties at that point of time. We have the Whig party supporting the funding the Edinburgh, and the Tory party supporting the Quarterly. We have writers like Robert Southey, William Hazlitt Macaulay, and Thomas Carlyle. For years, these writers and these particular Quarterly and Edinburgh being the headquarters of serious discussions on politics, literature, religion, philosophy, and other things in general. So we have these, and when I say these writers or these reviews were political organs, they used to criticize the writers or the poets of that particular age. For example, Edinburgh attacked William Wordsworth, and Quarterly maltreated John Keats. So we have that kind of criticism, the politically biased criticism on the writers. So literary criticism was also on the higher side at that point of time. Another type emerged, another type of like uh, literary pieces emerged in the middle of the 19th century, which were known as magazines. Yeah, we have periodicals or periodical newspapers, then we have reviews, and then we have magazines. And these three are entirely different things. So in magazines, it had all kind of compositions like critical, creative, informative, entertaining. All kind of um, writings were accepted in magazines. And you can see Charles Lamb, Coleridge, Hazlitt, all of them contributed to the magazines of that period. And the tradition of literary essay was carried out to the Victorian age by other writers like Matthew Arnold, Walter Pater, John Marley, Leslie Stephen, J. A. Simmons. And we have writings, we have magazines in which we can incorporate. When I said in the initial part, we cannot define essay as such with a satisfactory of comprehensive definition. I meant about this. By the time magazines came, a lot of different kinds, different types of compositions, literary pieces can be labeled under essays. So initially we had a definition of essay, but later on a different kind of essay emerged. So it changed. That particular initial definition cannot be considered valid. So in course of time, we have different kinds of essays. So in magazines, it always gave the liberty to write any kinds of essays. So by the end of 19th century, we have like forewords, prefaces, maybe like speeches, articles, political theses, scientific theses, everything incorporated into the essay format. So when we talk about emergence and the development of essay, this is a point where we have a kind of saturation. Almost all the kind of short prose pieces were considered as essays, and later it moved on to the 20th century, where we cannot talk about different genres. We cannot just talk about different types. Like we talked about character sketches, critical essays, periodical essays, reviews, magazines. We don't have such kind of a common platform or common type for essays in the 20th century. And except for one factor, that personal essays returned in the 20th century, with Charles Lamb. As you already know, Lamb is still considered as the prince of personal essays. So actually that's the point where we have almost all the short literary pieces were considered as essays, or prose pieces were considered as essays. So that's basically a short introduction about origin and the development till the 20th century, not the 20th century, till the 19th century, because in 20th century it's almost the common format which can include almost anything and everything. Thank you.